Yeah, Mike, you're absolutely right. That was like in 83 BC when Tigran the Great
Hmm.
incorporated Cilicia into his, Armenian state or an Armenian empire. But an important point to be made, you're making a good point. Like Cilicia, as we said, like always had Armenian population, but politically, most of the time it was obviously outside of Armenia.
Yeah.
It was part of ancient kingdoms. I said, like I mentioned, those early Armenian states, but after that, politically, it fell under various empires that, later on expanded and took over this area. Although, for the time being, which is also quite interesting, a kingdom of Ararat also incorporated these areas through the conquest of Menua and especially Argishti the First, also incorporated parts of Cilicia into his empire. But it switched hands so many times, and later on, it was part of the Seleucid Empire. The Seleucids, as you know, was
Yeah.
one of the offshoots when the empire of Alexander the Great split into three parts. The Seleucids, which was Seleucus was one of the generals of Alexander the Great. He created his own empire, and Cilicia became part of that empire. Later on, it became part of the Roman Empire. But very briefly, as you rightly pointed out, it was actually part of the Armenian state
Yeah.
during the reign of Iran the Great. And it's also quite interesting. I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but even we have Roman accounts from the 4th century that actually mention that Armenia begins, or Armenian presence begins in this area, Eastern Mediterranean Sea Basin. And actually, there's a famous Roman historian, Ammianus Marcellinus, who, in the 4th century, he actually named and called the Gulf of Alexandretta, which is in this Cilician area in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea Basin. He called it the Armenian Gulf, or Gulf of Armenia. So even like Roman historians and sources mention that Armenians were already in very significant numbers during this time. And I think this is an important point because sometimes, people think that, the Armenian presence dates from medieval or late medieval times, like especially in the 11th century. But, this is the contrary to historic evidence. There was already pretty significant Armenian presence, very significant presence.
Yeah, and like you've been saying, we've had Armenians in different states, different provinces, different areas, very relevant areas in and across what's called Asia Minor, right? So what I want to know is what do some of the mainstream sources or classical sources tell us about that relationship between Armenians in Cilicia and Armenians from Greater Armenia or different parts of, predating the Cilician times, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Like I said, a very important source is Ammianus Marcellinus, which is an important, classical historian of the 4th century, and he obviously basically points out that Armenia as a country begins in this area roughly. So it's even beyond Greater Armenia, as I pointed out. And what is interesting, there's also another very important source, John Chrysostom, who was actually patriarch of Constantinople. He also talks about very significant, in the 4th century, significant Armenian presence in Cilicia.